Chabad Lubavitch Bar Mitzvah boys recite the Maamer, a Hasidic discourse. The Maamer was authored by the 4th Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Rebbe Maharash, in honor of his middle son, Rabbi Shalom Dovber, who later became his successor. Rabbi Shalom Dovber, known as the Rebbe Rashab, recited it at his bar mitzvah in 1873. His only son, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, who later became the 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe, also recited it at his bar mitzvah in the summer of 1893. It's all about tefillin and the meaning of spiritual maturity at 13 years of age. Our Rebbe encouraged every bar mitzvah to study and memorize this Maamer. Chapter 1. The Midrash states that God said to the Jewish people, "Fulfill the mitzvah of tefillin, and I will consider it as if you diligently studied Torah all day." This is difficult to understand because putting on tefillin takes only a few minutes. How then can it be the spiritual equivalent of studying Torah for hours on end? Clearly, there must be a unique connection between putting on tefillin and the study of Torah. A better understanding of these mitzvah and their deeper significance is needed. Regarding mitzvah, our sages taught that we aren't the only ones fulfilling them. Putting on tefillin and the study of Torah, God does them too. In fact, when we do our mitzvahs, God reacts by doing the same. Unlike a regent who issues commands but has a different set of standards for himself, God does everything he asks us to do as long as we obey his commands. The logical progression of this spiritual domino effect mitzvah theory is that when we put on our tefillin, God responds in kind by putting on his tefillin. Now, our tefillin contains parchment scrolls detailing the exalted nature of divinity, along with many of the most fundamental obligations we have towards the Almighty. Appropriately, our sages queried, what message might God's tefillin contain? The Talmud responds, "And who is like your people Israel, one nation on earth?" Exactly what all of that means is hard to fathom, as God has no bodily reality. It most certainly cannot be understood literally. Instead, undoubtedly, all of this is a metaphor. And if God's tefillin contain a message about our greatness, then his putting on tefillin must mean that our stature becomes magnified and elevated. To better understand this all, certain axiomatic theological principles must be better clarified. It's fair to say we generally assume that mitzvahs performed must be very meaningful to God, but it's also fair to ask, if God is so great and the cosmos he created is so unfathomably vast, how can we reasonably imagine that he is concerned with such tiny details? After all, a human being is not even a speck of dust in compared to the galaxies, and yet the entire universe is considered insignificant in comparison to God's true greatness. How then could a tiny act performed by a person be meaningful to God who is so awesome? Compellingly, there are actually spiritual verses matter of factly stating he doesn't care. To be equally sure, however, the entire Torah is based on the notion that God cares deeply. How to answer this theological paradox? How can we reconcile this seeming contradiction? Our sages emphasize that essential divinity transcends creation and even definition altogether. However, for reasons impossible for us to understand, God chose to create and engage us. God's interaction with us telescopes both possibilities. He is always aware of our deeds, but times he chooses not to react. The Torah refers to this transcendent state as God sleeping. A metaphoric portrait of different states of divine consciousness helps clarify this mystery. When God chooses not to care or react, it's referred to as divine slumber. And conversely, God's choosing to react is metaphorized as a divine awakening. When sleeping, consciousness vastly decreases. Cerebral activity is limited to the imagination. Our study of Torah and performance of mitzvahs serve to awaken God, drawing forth his presence. This is the meaning of prayerful verses that beseech God to awake or to look down and see us. Furthermore, when engaging in Torah study, God sees us through the prism of that activity, which act as a magnifying glass through which the Jewish people's stature is greatly magnified. Our tefillin causes God to put on tefillin, which we already established magnifies our stature, just like Torah study does. So it would not be unreasonable to say tefillin achieves similar results. Chapter 2. To better understand the synonymy created by tefillin and Torah study, let's try to appreciate the unique quality of the Torah that makes its study so important. Our sages put it this way: Torah preceded the creation of the universe by 2,000 years, but since time and space, example, the concept of sequence, were also created in the beginning. 2,000 years cannot refer to time, rather they must denote 2,000 levels of its loftier nature. Instead of being a chronological statement, it's a declaration of the Torah's greatness. Torah wasn't really created before the world, rather, it's infinitely greater than the world. Creation is an expression of divine emotion, when God as creator relates to the universe. Relating to those outside of oneself means engaging emotionally, so creation is emotive. But the Torah is God's intellect and therefore transcends of creation and the universe. An intellectual does not require others to be himself. He can sit and ruminate alone all day. By contrast, however, the kind of compassionate individual needs somebody to be kind to. In fact, minus a meaningful recipient, the emotion itself disappears as if it never existed. Patriarch Abraham was an embodiment of this. His kindness was a defining character trait. He sat at the tent door in the heat of the day, seeking guests, despite his personal discomfort, because he desperately wanted to find someone to shower with his kindness, for without that, Abraham is a host and source of benefaction, loses his potential for expression. Similarly, God's mercies and kindnesses are related to the reality of creation, the universe. Without creation, divine kindness wouldn't be. After all, who would receive that kindness? The notion of God's intellect, by contrast, transcends the emotive dimension entirely, and is by definition above and beyond creation. Torah therefore precedes the world. For as an emanation of divine wisdom, the Torah is an expression of God's intellect. Therefore, the Torah is intrinsically above and beyond creation and the cosmos, which are an expression of divine emotions transcended by Torah by 2,000 times or levels. Chapter 3. When the Jewish people study Torah, it creates a stir in the heavens, causing the forces of divine intellectuality to energize the emotive dimensions of godliness, as a surge of transcendent infinite energy spills into the finite natural order of divine creation, which elevates and energizes the spiritual cosmos with a ripple effect impacting our world as well. Just like our being intellectually engaged naturally stimulates, animating us emotionally as well. Similarly, God's putting on tefillin also brings about a kindred surge of divine intellect, which impregnates the realms of divine emotion, stimulating, energizing, and elevating them. And since God puts on tefillin as a result of our performance of that very mitzvah, those possessing intellectual maturity are able to bring forth this surge of divine intelligence. Therefore, a child who has yet to reach the necessary threshold of intellectual maturity can't put on tefillin, which would catalyze the reflexive dawning of God's heavenly tefillin. To achieve this, he must first reach the requisite 13 years of age, entering intellectual maturity. And this is how fulfilling the mitzvah of tefillin can be compared to hours of diligent Torah study, because both bring about parallel spiritual results on high-affecting divinity in like fashion. Both evoke a surge of divine intellectual energy which similarly animates heavenly emotions. Nonetheless, the term as if is used when comparing tefillin with studying Torah day and night, for ultimately, the two distinct pursuits aren't fully identical, and effects of intense Torah study are significantly more potent than those of dawning tefillin. The spiritual surge of divine animating energy generated by Torah study reach our realm and actually enter the atmosphere of materials reality in the lowly corporal world. Whereas, by contrast, the surge of spiritual energy evoked by fulfilling the mitzvah of tefillin remains on high within the divine source of energy that actualizes and animates the cosmos. That's why God considers dawning tefillin only as if one who would study Torah day and night. Mazel tov.